Hello and welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV. On this program, we discuss issues around politics, policy, and governance. I am Shafiu Suleiman. The Supreme Court on Thursday affirmed President Bola Tinubu of the All Progressives Congress (APC) as the valid winner of the presidential election that was held in the country on February 25. The Apex Court, in its lead judgment, which was prepared and presented, held that there was no merit in the petition that former Vice President and candidate of the People's Democratic Party, PDP, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, filed to nullify the outcome of the election. It held that Atiku did not prove that INEC did not substantially comply with provisions of the Electoral Act in the conduct of the election. Similarly, the Supreme Court has struck out the appeal of Peter Obi, the presidential candidate of the Labour Party in the February 25 election. In its ruling on Thursday, the 7-member panel held that the issues canvassed by Obi were the same as that of Atiku Abubakar, presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, PDP. Thus, there was no need for a repeat. Now, take a look at this report. Deliberating judgment on the appeals, the Apex Court ruling on the admissibility of fresh evidence brought by Atiku Abubakar against President Bola Tinubu said it cannot admit such findings having failed to go through the lower court and brought outside the conditions stipulated by Section 22 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and therefore dismissed it. The Supreme Court also agreed with lower court's reasoning on the place of electronic transmission of result and status of the Federal Capital Territory over the contentious 25% benchmark, ruling that the decisions of the tribunal that malfunctioning of the IREP does not invalidate the election result, just as the FCT does not enjoy any special privilege from the rest of the country. It then dismissed the appeals after resolving the 7 grounds of appeal against the appellants.
The major thrust of the judgment is the fact that FCT is not to be accorded any special recognition as sought for by the appellants.
That is the interpretation they have given to it, and it is binding on us all. Just one sentence. Nigeria is work in progress.
All destruction is over. It's now about governance. The judgment was sound. We invite all political parties.
Now, President Bola Tinubu has also reacted to the Supreme Court verdict. The president, who was swarmed by some members of his cabinet as well as other well-wishers while at his office in the villa, accepted the Supreme Court judgment, describing it as a win for democracy and justice.
Yeah, I'm prosperous Nigeria, and that's my belief.
Now that your mandate is short, sir, and Nigerians are now waiting to see what comes out from this administration. So how are you rewarding Nigerians with the mandate they've given to you, Your Excellency?
I've started from day one to work hard, regardless of, the court cases, okay? And just strengthen my resolve to do more. A challenge of this nature and a future of this nature is more work and more hard work, more dedication. And just appeal to the sense of patriotism of Nigeria to have a change of mindset. Let us be positive about our country, be ready to contribute in all ways possible. There's no promise of El Dorado from day one. We're all in this boat of diversity, a member of the same family, living in the same house, but staying in different rooms. And it is important that we recognize that we have no other country but this one. So we better be committed to it, not for the sake of our own self-aggrandizement. Our commitment to the values, the creed of dedication, patriotism, and commitment to the value of this country. It is extremely important that we have a change of mindset for the sake of our country.
And the Supreme Court judgment concludes the litigation process around the 2023 presidential elections in Nigeria. Now, in what has been most controversial and contentious elections in Nigeria's history, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu of the APC has been judged elected for lack of meritorious evidence to the contrary and due to technicalities pointed out by the Presidential Election Petition Court at the Supreme Court of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Now, I have in the studio a former chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, Professor Atahiru Jega, a highly respected statesman. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Now, let's look at, let's start perhaps, and let's start with the most recent, talking about the judgment of the Supreme Court as it relates to the electronic transmission of result, which is very fundamental. Now, electoral accountability is key, and perhaps that's the reason why INEC, right from the time you headed it up to today, has been looking at the need to transform, the processes, making it, digital compliance, such that it will add value, to the outcome. So what do you make up with this judgment now, saying that, electronic transfer of result or transmission of result is not mandatory, and it does not invalidate the outcome, if you like, or the result of the election?
Yes, thank you very much. And with regards to the issue you raised in terms of whether the failure of INEC to transmit presidential elections to the IREV portal. And the IREV portal, as you know, is just a platform to enable citizens to be able to follow the results as they come in. So, to be honest, on that aspect, that's what I thought was going to be the judgment, consistent with what the tribunal, Presidential Elections Tribunal,
the lower court, yes.
The lower court has adjudged. You see, there are many aspects relating to the electronic transmission of result. The primary instrument for that is the BVAS. So the BVAS, the bimodal accreditation system. So from the polling unit, the BVAS would do the accreditation and the authentication of voters, and then it will send the results of that accreditation to a database. And for the purposes of ensuring that irregularities have not happened, the law requires that the beavers will be brought to the collation center so that the collation officers in the constituency levels would compare what is on the beavers and what has been sent with the paper
recorded
manually. And if there is a discrepancy, then you rely on what is on the beavers itself. But the issue of sending results to the IREV is something extra that the Electoral Commission wanted to do in order to show how good and in order to get the public to have trust and confidence in the use of technology, so that they can see how results are coming. But it was not a requirement of the law that they should set up that database and that they should transmit results to that IREV. So, if it had worked well, certainly it would have been very, very good. It would have added value, and citizens would be very happy seeing results as they come from the different polling units. Regrettably, the chairman of INEC had made assurances, but it turned out not to work as he himself, I'm sure, envisaged.
That's right.
You know, but to now turn around and use it as grounds to invalidate the election results, frankly, I think is stretching it too far and beyond what the legal provisions are. And I think the Supreme Court has now finally settled that matter.
Right. Okay. Even though we'll come back to the issue of confidence, electoral confidence, talking about acceptability of the process by the public. You pioneered, these digital innovations in INEC when you came up with the smart card reader. That was in 2015. And substantially, that election was adjudged one of the freest, elections in Nigeria, after the 1993 election and so on. And with just one technology, smart card reader, and then it restored a lot of confidence on the part of the public. Substantially, litigations also went down. There was almost zero litigations around that election. But now, with the introduction of all of these technologies, IREB, the VBAs and so on and so forth, yet we're having this deficit in public confidence. Is it that the Commission did not, do well in terms of the ensuring the consolidation works, or is it about the legal framework?
Well, first of all, I want to reiterate that use of technology adds value to the integrity of elections if it is done well. And doing well means choosing the right kind of technology and also applying it consistent with the regulations that the INEC itself has issued and consistent with the legal framework, constitutional as well as Electoral Act provisions. So Nigeria needs to keep on trying to integrate incremental use of technology in our elections, because it will improve the efficiency. For example, limit the time, particularly if there is electronic transmission of results, the time it takes to collate and announce the results. Because the earlier the results are announced, certainly the better, and the lesser the room for contestation and agitation and apprehensions. So that is for that, and that is why I think, and I have recommended recently that we should actually now, when reviewing the Electoral Act, make sure that the use of result transmission electronically should actually be made mandatory. Because I believe that will take us to another level of the use of technology in our elections. The Electoral Act 2022, as it stands, gives INEC the power to use technology. When we did the 2015 elections, there were question mark as to whether the use of the card reader was legal, and I think some of the courts said that using the card reader was not in the laws.
That's right.
But now it's been made in the law. What it means is INEC now is free to decide where to use technology. And they decided that they could use technology using beavers in a limited form. They did not decide to go the whole hog of transmitting results electronically for the purpose of collation and announcing results. Unfortunately, some people used that as an excuse to go to court and say INEC did not do what is required by law to do, and clearly the law did not require them to do that.
Right. Okay. Beyond making it mandatory, perhaps backing it up with the legal, giving it the legal backing now. do we have substantially addressed the issue of infrastructure? Because if we don't have, looking at what happened, what transpired in 2023, issues around glitches, issues around, you know, a failure of the device itself, and series of attacks, you know, do we go ahead and make it legal and make it mandatory without addressing some of these fundamentals?
No, I mean, nobody has absolute control. You can plan and plan very well, and you can do your best, you know, but people cannot assume that they are God and they can make everything perfect, you know, but what is required is to ensure that everybody does his or her best in order to keep on improving the integrity of the electoral process. And in that regard, I believe that the scope is there and there is room for improvement as we move from the 2023 elections to the 2027 election. And that is why it is key to start early. And starting early is to start with a review of the Electoral Act 2022. We've now used it. It came very late, but at least we've used it. We've seen what works and what has not worked. We should now try to strengthen it. But beyond the legal framework, obviously INEC has a lot of work to do in order to restore public confidence.
Yeah, that's actually what I'm into. Because looking at perhaps the lessons learned, you know, the fact that the litigations are now over and we are heading towards off-season elections in 3 states now for a start, Kogi, Imo, and Anambra, and Bayelsa, rather. So how do you think, because substantially many believe that public confidence has been eroded as a result of the outcome of the 2023. How do you think INEC can bolster this public confidence going into these off-season elections?
I think INEC probably needs to pay a lot of attention to strategic planning and also to very transparent and constructive engagements with all the key stakeholders involved in the electoral process. I believe that proactive strategic communication would have minimized the wrong perception that developed over the failure of IREV. You know, yes, IREV failed, and recently I had occasion to advise that we should be careful about beginning to apportion blame on the failure of IREV without a thorough investigation. You know, people may assume that IREV failed, and that seems to be the major position people are taking because INEC was compromised. You know, but it may well be that some people out there who are desperate to win election and who didn't want the transmission of results to be seen by the public, because otherwise everything will be glaring, may have interfered with the process. So there is need to have a thorough investigation. And I think the challenge was that when this happened, I suspect that INEC was overwhelmed and was trying to find exactly what had happened, and there was that gap in communication. And in the Nigerian context, where virtually every public official is assumed guilty until he or she proves himself innocent, then very quickly perceptions develop and which create a problem. So there are things that can be sanitized by electoral legal reform. But I think a lot of the things that are required have to do with our own mindset, not only as citizens, as voters, but in particular the mindsets of our politicians who contest elections with a profound level of desperation, wanting to win the elections and
our development
capable of doing
partners,
anything.
the representative of the Code of Conduct Bureau,
we have to work very, very hard.
Observers from the Commonwealth
that by the next elections in 2027, we see greater collaboration between civil society organizations and the INEC and the political parties and all the key stakeholders in the electoral process. Better information and communication, better engagement, and then we should also be looking forward towards greater professionalism in the way in which INEC prepares and conduct elections. So far, they are doing excellently well with regards to planning. You know, but it's one thing to plan, it's another thing to deliver.
That's right.
You know, and a lot of effort needs to be focused on that.
Right, talking about strategic and proactive communication, which is key. You know, you identified that gap, you know, that led to all of this suspicion and so on and so forth. It appears, you know, the failure of the IREP or the non-functionality of the electronic transfer of the result overshadowed a number of milestones that were achieved. But then there hasn't been much communications in terms of what went well. For instance, we've seen substantially how the election was able to change some narratives. People, I mean, incumbent governors have lost their seats. You know, people who have been in power have been, you know, challenged and they lost elections and so on. And people who you never thought could even make it have made it, you know, to their respective elected positions and so on. That hasn't been communicated well. Does it still boil down to the gap in communication?
Well, you see, I think in Nigeria we've also regrettably, maybe because of the general failure of the state to use governance in order to pursue a development trajectory that can improve the basic needs of citizens. So because of that, citizens distrust public institutions of governance or even institutions such as the Electoral Commission. And so everything is perceived negatively. For example, even the transmission of results by IREV, I mean, to IREV, it's only the presidential election that failed.
Perfectly in some elections before the general election.
Yes, so that's why it's important to pose the question why, and to investigate it and to be able to establish exactly what went wrong. So, but once that failed, then everything is condemned. And I can tell you the IREV, not IREV, but the beavers. It's a remarkable improvement over the card reader. You know, it does authentication, it does verification, and now not only does it store results, it also sends results. You know, so INEC will still have to continue to improve the use of the beavers. You know, so I don't agree. Recently, somebody was asking me that Nigerians have developed a perception of things have remained the same. And my attitude is to say, look, things have not remained the same. If you compare 2007, 2011, 2015, 2019, you can see significant incremental positive changes. So the challenge is to try and avoid what I call reversals. Reversals that will totally negate the integrity of the elections. But if we are seeing pockets of improvements and pockets of challenges, and the improvements are larger than the challenges you see, particularly, it means we are going somewhere. You know, so I think Nigerians also need to be patient with the pace of change. I think we are so disappointed, as I mentioned earlier on, that any slight excuse we have, we pursue what I call self-flagellation. You know, we really punish ourselves more than is necessary because we are just angry that things are not.
We're so impatient.
We are so impatient. So we have to recognize the countries that we see as models. They've been
gone through all of this.
Yeah, they've gone through all of this, and they've also been there for you know, centuries. Others 2 centuries. Trying, you know, before they got to where they are.
Especially looking at our peculiarities. You know, we're having one of the largest voter database,
certainly in Africa,
talking about the whole of Africa, and the diversities, the complexities, and all of that. Okay, beyond the fact
but let me also say that, to be honest, and sometimes people think I am too harsh on this. The greatest difference between our electoral legal electoral environment with others is the attitude with which our politicians engage with elections, and also the attitude with which elected officials engage with governance.
Yeah. So if I understand your position, perhaps you're talking about electoral mobilization or awareness now, public awareness and mobilization.
No, public awareness is one issue, and in a country of remarkable percentage of illiterate voters, a lot needs to be done in terms of sensitization, voter education, even civic education, for people to know the need to come out and vote people that can really contribute to addressing their fundamental needs and aspirations. But who are supposed to do this? The elite, governance institutions, you know. But when you have politicians in particular, whose mindset is to win election by hook or by crook, so they do not want enlightened voters, because enlightened voters will
find it would be an obstacle.
Yeah, will be an obstacle. So therefore, they don't, in their own political parties, pay attention to voter
which is part of their responsibility.
Which is part of their responsibility. Look, you are the ones, the parties are the ones who field candidates. Therefore, they want their candidates to win the election. So they need to mobilize voters. First, to come out to vote. Secondly, to know how to vote, so that when they vote, they do not waste their vote. You know, but in my experience in INEC, political parties will be asking INEC to give them money to do voter education, either for registration or for knowing how to vote. So that kind of mentality has to change.
It has to be all hands on deck.
All hands need to be on deck. Actually, that is the point.
Right. Okay, in case you're just joining us, the program is Daily Politics, and today we're looking at strengthening Nigeria's electoral process, especially ahead of the off-season elections in Nigeria, consolidating the gains of our democratic process or evolution. And we have in the studio Professor Tahiru Jega, former chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. We'll also be getting his polls, if you like, or his takeaways from the just concluded, no, not yet concluded, Liberia election 2023. He happens to be there, and we'll get to know some of these takeaways. So stay with us, we'll be back shortly.
That's great. It's good to see you.
It was never a consensus. We did all our best. You see, in politics, you give your contribution to the best of your ability.
If you want, I'll forward to you this statement. You go to this bank and verify.
But there are people who say not spending money is not about you in itself.
Let me finish.
Because there's so much to be done.
Let me finish. Now, you don't allow me to explain myself.
The recent development shows abductions are now a factor of informants embedded in community.
It's not about the people of Katsina to say that, no, during my administration I was able to stop insecurity. No. It's about collective responsibility for all of us.
And what we should ask ourselves is not what has been seen, is the life better? Are there more people who are unemployed who are not become employed? Is the level of corruption has gone down? Is there inclusion? All those issues.
We're actually a gas country with associated oil. Our focus has always been on oil, that we have never paid significant attention to gas.
To do it effectively, we need to have honest conversation with ourselves. Government needs to come down from its higher horse and communicate with the people and build trust
There must be a solution. We cannot continue this way. They must come back to the table and agree. So whose child will do deny education? All these children that sit for jam, they want to go to higher institutions.
But just a short while ago, you were saying that why bring 10 children when you cannot cater for them? So why bring more universities when you cannot cater for the existing?
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Daily Politics on Trust TV. Do well to follow us across all our social platforms and watch us live on YouTube. Now, Professor, we're back. And just before the break, we were talking about, what is required by other stakeholders, to enhance the electoral process and so on. And I was worried, recently when INEC under Professor Mahmoud Yakubu is also raising concerns in respect to litigations around pre-election matters that are making it difficult for INEC to come up with the sensitive materials, especially as we head towards this
production of ballot papers.
Exactly. So they find it difficult, continuous litigations. After making certain amendments, another judgment comes on, and so on and so forth. Now, how do we address some of this, because it is beyond INEC. Other stakeholders also have a role to play. In this kind of scenario, how do we get it right? Take, for instance, the off-season election in Kogi, Bayelsa, and Imo, which is just around 2 weeks or so. And then yet, some political parties don't even have candidate going by the court's pronouncements. So how do we resolve these issues?
Frankly, it's something that both the parties, the candidates, and the courts have to work very hard to minimize the tendency for every issue to go to court. And in fact, a tendency in which now it's appearing as if it is the courts that are declaring people as winners of elections rather than the electoral process itself. I think Nigerian politicians have developed a habit in which if I lose an election, I still have the hope of going to the courts and in one way or the other being declared as the winner of the election. And of course that tendency is now also affecting the integrity of the judiciary. So judiciary needs to do a lot to speed up the process of dispensation of justice and to also dispense justice appropriately. And the politicians themselves also need to really recognize that, as people quite often say, elections are a contest, like a play. Somebody has to win.
That's right.
There must be a winner and a loser. And if you lose and it's evident that you have lost, then there should be no desperation to keep on going to courts and trying to even induce members of the judiciary in order to have results declared in one's favor. So it's very important. But of course, INEC itself also needs to keep on improving how it conducts elections, to give no room for people to now latch onto a minor, not necessarily minor, but some challenges to use as the opportunity to keep on going to court. So I think if INEC tries to do its job professionally, competently, on a non-partisan and impartial basis, then increasingly that can help sanitize. But there are things, as you rightly pointed, that INEC has no control over. The issue of people going to court, how soon the judgments will be given, is still a serious challenge, and it impacts quite often negatively on the work of the Electoral Commission.
Right. Another key challenge, just recently, talking about the multi-stakeholder, roles in the electoral process. Just yesterday or so, the president appointed, a number of resident electoral commissioners and so on. There has been also contention around the man that was appointed from Rivers State, the REC in Rivers State, for instance. He was said to have, served under the former administration of Governor Nyesom Wiki as administrator, land, special advisor on land, and so on. And then remember, before now, there has been also issues around the nomination of President Muhammadu Buhari's special assistant also that has generated a lot of controversy. Now, looking at all of this, and then the fact that INEC at this crucial moment is working towards regaining the confidence of the public, how do you think this will rub up to all of this we are talking about?
To be honest, it's unfortunate for this to happen, and recently I have had cause to actually demand for a review of the process of appointment of the resident electoral commissioners, but not only them, including the chairman and the national commissioners. Ordinarily, perception develops around he who pays the piper dictates the tune.
That's right.
But in addition to that, sometimes these perceptions are based on some reality that happens. And I gave the example of the 2023 elections, where resident electoral commissioners were appointed, and there was a particular person very close to the president who instigated these appointments. Unfortunately, they are not properly screened, and in the end, the major challenges we saw in the 2023 elections happened under these resident electoral commissioners. They disobeyed lawful directives by the commission, and a lot of that is based on this assumption that the same people who appointed you also appointed us. So I think moving forward, and I make that very strong recommendation, first of all, there should be a transparent, independent process of appointing chairman and members of the commission, national commissioners, independent of the president, so that in the end, whoever emerges cannot be said to be an appointee of the president who is going to do a bidding of the president. And if you are able to to appoint people on that basis, and you have competent people with integrity now in the commission, then obviously they should be given the power to appoint the resident electoral commissioners as administrative officers in charge of the states. That way you avoid this situation of lack of clear lines of authority and the indiscipline, because it's indiscipline for a resident electoral commissioner in charge of the state to be told this is what he or she should do and refuse to do it. And why, if you investigate thoroughly, you will find that they are trying to do the bidding of those who influenced their appointment. So I think leading to the next election, this issue of appointment into the Electoral Commission, which we call an independent National Electoral Commission, we should also find ways of ensuring that we recruited people with clear independence, and that can also enhance the independence with which they discharge their responsibilities.
But how do we insulate, the executive from interfering or from taking some of these roles, looking at the fact that, beyond even the appointments, yes, appointments are substantial, is a substantial issue, but even finances, comes from the same. Even finances come from the same, executive. For instance, it has to be. It has to go through the other arms of government, the executive and the legislature. But then I think we need to take a break. When we return, you now answer this question. Stay with us.
That's great.
Thank you very much. It's still Daily Politics, and today we're looking at strengthening our electoral process. Of course, consolidating the gains of our evolution as a country in terms of our electoral processes, and especially ahead of the off-season elections. Before the break, Professor, I was asking this question. You make strong recommendations on the need to make INEC truly independent, especially in terms of appointments. Around the appointment issue, again, appointments of people, of commissioners, to head certain units in the electoral management body, and the synergy, between them coming outside the establishment and the people within, the civil servants, also has been a very serious matter. Finding that synergy and that cooperation is also very fundamental. That is one, especially against sabotage and so on. And then two, I was talking about, finances, making INEC financially independent, because beyond appointments, even the monies that comes to INEC are subject to approval and all of that of the executive, and of course approval of the legislature. So how do we insulate INEC, make it truly independent?
Yes. Well, thank you very much for raising that. It's a very important question. But what is clear is that luckily, INEC now has what we can call relative financial autonomy.
Okay.
The law is very clear now, particularly under the 2022 Electoral Act, that for the purposes of an election, INEC should be given all the financial requirements at least 1 year before the election. So that way they can really plan and they can execute their plans without having to wait or to go hand in cup begging the executive for the resources to be able to conduct elections. So frankly, there is remarkable financial autonomy with that regards, and from our experience, INEC compared relative to other electoral commissions in the sub-region, they get resources to be able to really plan and conduct elections. But what remains is the issue of the pressures that come with being appointed by an executive that also is not only incumbent but wants to remain in power, to retain power. So that kind of relationship would require a level of insulation that can allow them to do their job also impartially and without any pressure or influence, because of the manner in which they have been appointed. And the other countries in Africa are beginning to do that. If you have a process, for example, like they do in Kenya, where you have a parliamentary committee that has clearly defined guidelines in terms of what kind of personalities should be appointed into the Electoral Commission, with what experience, with what qualification, with what competence, and also with what level of integrity. And so this parliamentary committee will advertise that there is a vacancy in the Electoral Commission, you know, and anybody who feels that he can do this,
possess the required,
can apply. Other people, because there are people also who may possess that requirement but will be modest enough not to apply, other people can nominate. It is left to them to say, okay, I accept the nomination or I don't.
It becomes very competitive.
Very competitive. Even the president can nominate.
That's right.
But then there is a very transparent process in which they do public hearing.
That's right.
And the citizens are allowed, if you have any information about any person, a nominee, that you think you should share so that such a person shouldn't be appointed, you also bring it. So at the end of it, when you appoint people into
a very thorough process,
screening, rigorous screening process, widely with public participation and vigilance, you know, so such people, will not have this negative perception that they've been appointed by the president and the president will dictate to them whatever they do.
That's right.
You know, and then once you do that, then allow them to hire and fire those who can administratively help them to execute their mandate as an electoral commission.
Not necessarily coming from the executive arm.
Yes. So, but if you do that for the national commissioners and you still allow the president to appoint resident electoral commissioners, I feel that there will still be challenges with
integrity issues at stake.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. You are in Kenya. You know, I mean in Liberia. Very quickly because time has been past spent. We've learned. You know, we would like to get the takeaways. What has been done in Liberia different from what the Electoral Commission in Nigeria has done, and you think that Nigeria should learn a lesson?
First of all, the Electoral Commission in Liberia was actually appointed by the incumbent president who was also running for office. So there was this very, very serious negative perception that the Electoral Commission was going to just work for the ruling party. They were not given the benefit of doubt. And the resources they required, because this was the first time that Liberia
conducted
election without the support of the United Nations or other development partners, you know. So they did not get the financial requirement they needed to be able to conduct the election, you know. So, but still, and so because of inadequacy of resources, they were not able to do sufficient training, they were not able to do sufficient voter education, you know, and there were concerns about the logistics of deployment, you know, because the elections are taking place in October, which is the peak of the rainy season in Liberia, and Liberia has a deficit of infrastructure.
The terrain,
you know, the terrain is really bad, you know. So, but everybody was surprised, you know, because in spite of all these challenges, because really the observers were concerned that with all this baggage,
how can they
deliver? You know, and it turned out on election day. It turned out very well. You know, the logistics had minimal interference. The process was quite remarkable compared to what we see here in Nigeria or other African countries.
I understand one thing that was also remarkable was the fact, I mean, the outcome, I mean, the participation. Talking about almost 80%.
Absolutely, you know, about 75 or 78%.
You know.
Yeah. And then Nigeria, also, last election, we had what, 30%?
Yes, right.
Yeah, so frankly, to many of us, what that shows is that Liberian citizens are tired of violence. They want peace, and they want a government that can actually deliver. So they are patient. Yes, they believe that the electoral process can be the best avenue to get leaders elected. You know, and they turned out, you know, very disciplined queues. You know, in some places we were wondering if it were Nigeria and you have this large number, maybe very easily some kind of crisis would
even though the number, some would say, is relatively low compared to, because
but still in a polling unit,
they are not up to, you know, the registered voters, for instance, in Kaduna, almost double that of Liberia put together.
You are right. You are right. But elections are conducted in the polling unit, and the average size of the polling unit is almost the same, because they try to decentralize and make a polling unit no more than 500. You know, so but normally in the case of Nigeria, a very small percentage of the 500 will show up.
That's right.
You know, but in Liberia there were places where almost 85%, 90% turn out.
Right. Okay. One other thing, lastly, I understand was also the fact that there was due diligence, if you like, and patience on the part of the electoral management body in terms of getting it right.
Yes.
They wouldn't mind, you know, extending the time and all of that to ensure that there is due process, there is transparency. Is there any lesson to learn from that?
Yes, I think the lesson is really to have people who are passionate and who are trained and who have the integrity to be able, and the patience to be able to manage elections.
Yes.
I think our young men and women coppers have done relatively well, but I think they need to be well trained, you know, to have the patience, because sometimes lack of patience puts election polling agents, polling unit officials to act in a rash manner and create confusion themselves. You know, but an attitude of disciplined responsibility and therefore able to explain well to the voters what the procedures and processes are, and responding to questions even as the elections was going on. I think it was a commendable thing that we saw in Liberia, and I wish in Nigeria we can do that.
Thank you very much, Professor Tahiru Jega, for your informed perspectives on this topic. In case you're just joining us, this is where we come to the end of this conversation on strengthening Nigeria's electoral processes, of course, ahead of off-season elections, looking at the challenges identified in the last general elections. And of course, this is where we come to the end of this. If you find this engaging and informative, why don't you join us on Daily Politics Live, airing every weekday, and also on our special package on Friday, during which we open telephone line for you to comment on national issues. Once again, thank you very much, Professor, for coming.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
And viewers, this is where we have to thank you for watching. I am Shafiu Suleiman.